Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi there, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for today's third and final webinar. We have a very special guest for you today, Dr. Brian Underhill. Before I do anything, as always, can you please just raise your hands to let me know that you can hear me loud and clear and all is well? Okay, thank you very much. I apologize once again for those people that cannot raise their hands. I know it's frustrating if you're on an iPad, and especially if it's your first webinar and you're looking at it going, where is the raise the hand button? Unfortunately, there is not one. So people are taking care of that for you. So if you have any challenges, just please put it in the chat box. Now, as always, I'm going to ask that you jump onto Facebook, facebook.com/WBECS. And please post your comments, your questions, anything at all on there. It'd be great to hear from you, building great community there. Trust me, all of the speakers jump on there after their sessions to see how they did, because they can't actually see the comments that come through on the chat box. So please take the time to just jump over there, even if you're copying and pasting what you've put on the chat box over there. We had the heads of all the largest coaching organizations were all having a dialogue through email earlier on today about the feedback they received, and they were very chuffed about it, as were the panel of pro bono coaching organizations, associations, etc. that presented earlier on, and they got some great feedback, and it was lovely. And honestly, they're giving up their time for this, and the thanks is very much appreciated. Anyhow, so we have a super session today by Brian. Now, Brian, he focused on inspiring leaders to impact or to high impact executive coaches. He has spent 16 years screening executive coaches worldwide and has the scars to prove it. You're going to hear behind the scenes stories from building a pool of over 900 coaches. I think that's grown now, even more than that, in 43 countries to serve multinational corporations executive coaching requests. Now, Brian has personally traveled to all continents, meeting over 400 of these coaches personally, and in building and managing coaching pools for worldwide brands such as Dell, Microsoft, American Express, and a whole page worth of other top organizations. So he has an absolute wealth of experience, probably one of the most qualified professionals in the world to speak on this subject, if not the most qualified. So please do take notes. We do have some note takers that will take notes for you, as always. And so enjoy this session. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to my good friend, Dr. Brian Underhill. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Ben, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I am speaking to you from Silicon Valley, San Jose, California, just a few steps away from some of the major high-tech companies here in the area. It's a beautiful afternoon here in California, and I'm excited to be with you all today. Quick housekeeping note for those of you who tweet: you might want to pull up your Twitter on another screen or another device and get ready, as I will be asking a trivia question early in our presentation, and I will do so in order to give away one of our books, as you see shown there, Executive Coaching for Results. So get ready for that. But first, let me take us back to an early experience I had, kind of early days of the large-scale executive coaching implementations. And this is now going to take us back to about 2003, 2004. And at that time, I was working for Marshall Goldsmith, who, as you can see, is also a speaker in this WBETS conference. I spent about 9 years or so working with Marshall directly. And I was running executive coaching activities for him as we were starting to get more and more requests for coaching assignments. And we actually already had a pretty robust network. I would say about 500 coaches or so around the world, not in tons of countries yet, mostly US based. And at that time, one of the biggest tenders or RFPs for coaching came out from the real darling of the personal computer industry, which was Dell Computers. Dell wanted to coordinate their coaching activity and find one company to be in charge of coaching their top 600 executives over the next few years. It was the largest we'd ever seen, and any company that was going to win this proposal would easily be on the map in a big way. So this is nice and exciting. The challenge was that Dell wanted coaches in some places around the world that we just didn't have coaches, and they wanted lots of them. They wanted coaches in Brazil, in Panama City, in parts of Asia. I remember a certain section of France, the south part of France. And not only did they want us to provide, we can't just say, oh yes, we'll find coaches. We actually had to have the coaches screened and all of their bios put into a special Dell format, a special 2-page format that they wanted, and they wanted to start interviewing coaches. And they only gave us 2 weeks to pull all of this off. So we went into large-scale recruiting mode, looking for coaches all over the world. We asked our current coaches to fill out that special application, and then we put notes out to anyone we knew saying, we need coaches here and there and this other place and so forth. Please get them to apply, send in their application to us so we can screen them. And soon, applications were flooding our offices. I think we were sort of 24/7 reviewing coach applications and then calling coaches up and screening them by phone to then determine whether we could include them in our bid. Now, the crazy thing is that we were able to meet that deadline for Dell, and very excited to then have learned that we won that bid, and they are still a very valued client of ours today. But what I think I may have learned even more importantly through that experience was how to quickly find and then screen executive coaches. And I actually literally travel all over the world doing just that. Here's me, in fact, in a coffee house in Malaysia a bunch of years ago, meeting coaches. In fact, every city I travel to, for whatever reason I'm traveling there, even if I'm going there on vacation, I will spend a day before or after to try and meet the local coaches and get to know them so that I can be better equipped to make recommendations to my clients. So I've gotten pretty good at this, I believe, and today CoachSource does have a database of about 900 coaches in 43 or so countries around the world. I've personally met half of them, I believe, a little more than half of them. The rest I've screened in one form or another. And we have some pretty large implementations of coaching where we need coaches, and that's why I've gotten, I hope, pretty good at screening coaches. So today I'm going to share with you some of our research in how we find coaches and how companies find coaches and how we screen them and how our clients screen them as well. For those of you who are in charge of executive coaching at an organization, I know you will find this very helpful for the work that you do when you're trying to find coaches. For those of you who are coaches, I believe today will help you know what companies are looking for and how to get in front of those companies, how to make a good impression, as I'll share with you a few of my secrets of things that work well for us when we're screening coaches and things that just don't work well for us as well. So before I get into that, though, why don't I take us to our trivia question? And what we're going to try and do is see if you know your geography. And I will give away a book. We'll ship it to you no matter where you are in the world. If you can determine where this location is, oh yeah, there's my Twitter handle, by the way, just so you've got that ready. If you can determine where this location is in the world, and I've got a green arrow pointed to a little town called KOCS. I'll pause just for a moment. I'm going to rely on Twitter to tell me which tweet gets to me first, by the way. What country are we in the world? I'll now back out, and this will start to give it away for those of you who just don't know where we are, and I don't blame you. Sorry, there's my Twitter handle yet again. Here we are. We're backing out. Now you probably recognize a pretty big city on the map, and we'll back out yet one more time to show you where we are. We are in a little town called Kocs, K-O-C-S, in Hungary. And the reason why I'm showing this to you is it is believed that this is the town where the word coach originated. The reason for that is that this is the town where fine transportation carriages were made, horse and buggy. And the point of a carriage like this was to take you from where you were to where you wanted to go. And that's how we believe the word coach got associated with that type of activity. Of course, coaching, as we know, was much more used as it related to, sorry, I'm scanning my Twitter feed here. And so far, okay, there's someone, it looks like our winner is from I can't tell who the person is, but it's Transcend Coaching. And I'll respond to that individual to connect a little bit further. But it looks like someone from Transcend Coaching has tweeted in Hungary properly. So that's where we believe the word has originated. Now that we've gotten the trivia out of the way, let us take a look at what we're doing today. Again, sourcing, how do we find coaches, and then screening, how do we screen coaches to see whether or not we would want to use them in our work. We're going to start with source. How do we find the coaches? Now, Ben, this is the question I was wondering if we could use the chat box for, and more of a bit like a whiteboard, except it won't be showing it to you on a whiteboard status. But I'd like to hear from you, those of you who are coaches, how do you think you're most commonly found as a coach? And if you want to use the chat function here with GoToMeeting, Ben's going to start calling out some of what he's hearing or reading there. Those of you who screen coaches, if you're an internal person at a company, maybe you could tell us, how do you typically find coaches? And let's give you just a minute or two to kind of chime in on your answer, and let's see what Ben has to say.
Okay, so what we've got is word of mouth, referrals, word of mouth and referrals, personal referral, 100% referral, word of mouth referrals, references or online, relationships, LinkedIn, word of mouth referrals, recommendation through clients, the internet, a referral agent, by people who know me, so through referrals, word of mouth and through my network, LinkedIn and coach searches, references, word of mouth referrals, word of mouth referrals, website, published resources, conferencing and follow-up, personal meetings, networking, word of mouth. See if there's anyone different ones here. Testimonials on my site. Someone's worked with me, referrals.
Yeah, word of mouth referrals, it sounds like really the biggest ones, huh?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I'm just keep going through the ICF, coaching community promotions, publications, public speaking.
Yep.
Networking, ICF, seminars. Published blogs, Huffington Post blog.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's a good one, by the way. Okay, boards, local ICF websites, traffic, my personal blog, articles in the newspaper, referrals. I think that it just keeps going. Referrals, alumni organization. There you go, Brian.
Thank you, everyone. That's great. I totally agree with what I'm hearing there, especially the word of mouth and referrals. I'm now going to show you some research we've done. And those of you who are familiar with our book that we just showed earlier, we did this research originally in 2005. We repeated it just last year, and many of you may have even been part of our survey group And in fact, in case you're interested, the results are just days away from being released. I wish I had them ready for people today, but we don't. But probably in the next week or so, we should have results ready to share. But I'm going to share a bit of what we did find today. Some of the things we asked organizations about how do you find coaches. These were some of the choices we had given them if you want to wonder which one came in first. And I'll show you the results now. So organizations are in red, and external coaches, which probably most of us on the phone, are in orange. Again, how do you find a coach? And interestingly, the vast majority of organizations selected this choice where they're already using coaches from the vendors that they use, their preferred network, their preferred vendors. In fact, 85% of organizations indicated that as a way that they find coaches. And then 42%, so a big drop to the next choices from organizations. 42% and 41% say, well, coaches get in touch with us, or other companies tell us who it is that they're using. That's the word-of-mouth referral type thing. Then you have a big drop-off between the last two choices, which is that a coach might contact our leaders directly, or we find coaches on the web, where only 4% of companies indicated this. Excuse me. Some of these numbers have shifted since 2005, and I'd like to give you some insight on that. This one about our preferred vendors, 85%. My recollection from 2005 is that this number was around 75 to 80%. So this number has risen a little bit more from our original survey. Let me take a quick pause for a disclaimer. We would love to say that the respondents on our survey this year were the same as they were in 2005, but they, of course, aren't necessarily the same. So you're going to have that type of bias in this survey. So I'd like you all just to keep that in mind. But in any case, for what it's worth, by way of comparison, this number has raised, and it does match my experience that more companies seem to be moving towards finding one or two key vendors to really run and manage their pool of coaches, and then the coaches are sourced from those vendors. Another one, interestingly here, is many of us do believe that we're being found through recommendation. As you can see here, 3/4 of us pick that as the #1 choice. And this is much higher than what companies believe that they're doing to find coaches. So we found this interesting disparity here. And something else about searching the web. I think many of us believe that our websites are pretty important to how companies find us. And this number, 4%, has risen a little bit. In 2005, we found 2% of companies were searching the web. I lament when I see this, because at CoachSource, we're in the middle of revamping our website for the second time in about 2 years. They decided that we don't have enough key words that the search engines need, or something like that. So they're going through the whole thing and redoing it so the search engines can find us. And whenever I see this research, I sort of wonder why we're spending that kind of money. But in any case, I do recommend to coaches that it is the word of mouth, it's the referral, it's having companies recommend you, it's having other coaches maybe recommend you, like a coaching firm, but it's not so much about things like searching the web, as you can see here. By the way, just as someone who screens coaches, I'll tell you that I do go look at someone's website once I know who I'm about to speak with. I don't search for a coach in the first place that way, but once a coach has, we've been in contact with a coach, then yes, I do go look at their website. And by the way, I will say, if you have video on your website, I think that's a wonderful new addition that people are starting to add, coaches are, to their websites. And I always watch the video. I always go look at the bio, I look at picture, I always watch the video. In general, also just get a feel for the professionalism of the individual based on how their site looks. So I do want to say that I think the web still plays a role in establishing your legitimacy as a coach, even if they may not use it to find you in the first place. So based on this, I have a few suggestions on what would you want to do to be seen as a coach. And so I'll share with you a few of those here. One is certainly consider being aligned with at least one or more of the larger global coaching providers. Some of them use only full-time employees, but others of them use independent coaches, much like ourselves. And they're usually interested in additional coaches in certain regions, although in other regions they're often quite impacted with lots and lots of coaches. The Bay Area where I live, I think we may know over 100 executive coaches here. So we obviously don't really need more coaches in the Bay Area. But there's other parts of the world where we do always look for more coaches. I'll even talk about that in a moment. Some of you mentioned writing or speaking. Now, I do a fair amount of both, and I don't get a ton of work this way, I don't believe. However, you still can get some inquiries. You still can get something. And one of our largest clients today came to us because I had submitted a quote for a newspaper article that mentioned my name in just one line as it was talking about something else. Pardon me. Got to turn off my Twitter ringer. So I was mentioned, in passing, and the company saw my name and called, and it turned out to be one of the largest ones that we currently have. So for that reason, you just never know when something you've written or something, a speech that you've given somewhere could turn into something. For many years, Marshall has harassed all of us who work for him that you got to write and speak. You've got to write and speak. That's really the only way to get your name out there. Word of mouth, you mentioned. Referrals. Networking is what I put as a very important way to be seen and build your practice as a coach. I think it's a mistake for any coach who believes that other coaches are possible competition and therefore I shouldn't really interface with them. Instead, most of our work at CoachSource has come from coaches that end up referring us somewhere. There are so many times where a coach will encounter some work that they themselves aren't able to do or don't believe they're qualified to do, or they're not in the right location to do the work. And so they'll refer it to us. And I find that a lot of coaches are very generous about sharing referrals with other coaches who might be a better match for a particular client situation. So I strongly recommend to coaches to always be out there networking. In fact, whenever we're looking for coaches, as I mentioned in my original story, we put a note out to our existing coaches and we say, we're looking for a coach in Russia. Does anyone know anyone in Russia? And if you're a coach in Russia and you're pretty good at networking, you may have made some connections with hopefully someone that we know who gets us connected to each other. Another strong piece of advice I give is there are lots of coaches out there, as you well know. I believe Ben has told me he's got 11,000 people signed up for this particular conference. So what I often suggest is in leadership coaching, which is where we specialize, we really suggest that you pick something to really be an expert in. Marshall often says, become the world's leading expert at something and become very well known for that something. And while you might be able to coach on a variety of topics, whenever that particular something arises, many people will start to think of you as the right expert to assist in that particular request. For example, I have a coach friend of ours who has made a really good business out of personal branding. So he teaches leaders how to really build their personal brand, whether they're inside a company or outside. He's written blog posts on this, he gives a lot of speeches on this, and he's written a book. He's got another book on the way. He's got a website aimed towards this. And while we might hire him for a variety of leadership coaching challenges, whenever I get a request having to do with personal branding, he's the one that I think about. First and foremost, I don't even have to go to my database to try and remind myself, who do I call for personal branding? I can do it from the car while I'm driving. I can just say, oh yes, please contact such and so. And that's why I like to see coaches really specialize in something beyond just being a general coach. And my last suggestion is a joke. Unless you really would like to take me seriously, we find incredible growth in Asia in this field, particularly India and China. However, coaches there that we know are incredibly busy and are, especially in China, are having not too much trouble finding new work. And so I sort of jokingly tell folks that if you're up for a relocation and wondering where you might want to go next, some of the busy hot spots where there's fewer coaches around, Bangalore or Shanghai. Some places, again, where coaches are harder to find. There's China, there's India. By the way, here's me with a bunch of coaches in India a few years ago. This is all the coaches I could possibly find in Bangalore, India on this particular trip, and we're all having lunch together. I've now found a few more, but I used to joke that if this nice hotel fell apart, we would end the coaching industry in India in one fell swoop. Thankfully, that didn't happen. Brazil, definitely a continuing growing market for coaching, one that we're just starting to expand our network a little more than it currently is. Japan, I'm going to take this photo out. I must say, I'll have to admit now that we've got a pretty solid network there. Coaching has really taken on there. So I'm not sure that's as much of a challenge. But this is Central Eastern Europe and Russia. Is certainly a place where seasoned senior executive coaches are harder to find. Not Turkey. Turkey is doing just fine, but it's the Central European countries, Eastern Europe, Russia in particular, are challenging places to find coaches. I do believe that is a function of having an economy that has a well-developed business market and an entrepreneurial mindset. That the lack of that for many years in some of these countries, I think, is what's slowing the addition of new seasoned coaches into the coaching pool. So before I move on to screening coaches, Ben, I don't know if you're seeing any questions coming in on the question panel. Maybe we could take 2 or 3 questions on what we were just talking about as it related to how did we find coaches, and then we'll move on to how do we screen them. And I'm sure Ben has to unmute himself before he joins us, which is usually the case. Okay, well, maybe we don't have Ben.
Sorry, I'm here. Sorry, Brian, I've just been...
Oh, there we are.
I muted myself.
Yeah. Did you see any questions in the question panel? I can stop for maybe 2 or 3 at this.
Yes, certainly. Sorry, I just there's some wet on my screen. I couldn't actually press the button. It was like running away from me. Okay, yes, we have a lot of questions. Okay, are leadership issues similar in these other parts of the world?
That's a fabulous question. I wouldn't necessarily say they're similar. We do see some generalities that you might see around the world, but you do see some differences, and intercultural aspects become much more significant, obviously, in places where you might have an expat leader who's in charge, and then local talent or some other mixture therein. So sometimes we'll have, for example, I remember we got a request a few years ago where it was a German leader who came to Singapore to run a division in Singapore, and the rest of the talent there was Singaporean based. And this German leader was sort of rubbing people the wrong way with their style. And they actually asked us for, by any chance, might we have a coach in Singapore who was German, who could identify with this particular leader's challenges. Believe it or not, we actually did for that particular case. But I often find intercultural elements to be much more significant. In the U.S., of course, we seem to be a little more insular or even ignorant about different cultures here, finding that some of these companies will be mostly all Americans working together. Overseas, we see a lot more intercultural aspects of leadership that seem to appear. There's a lot bigger answer to that question than I could get into here, but that's a great start to it.
Okay, another question is, Brian, do you feel that fluency in the native tongue is required, essential, necessary, or is English adequate in most of these areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that English is most of the time adequate. Most of the requests that we get, and this is probably just simply because we tend to work with Western multinationals, so I do want to kind of put a little asterisk there. Most of the time, English-speaking coach is suitable, but maybe 10 to 20% of the time, they will specifically say, we really would like someone with local language fluency. So, could you please source someone like that? I do notice, interestingly, that some of the requests in China are increasingly going more and more towards, we'd really like a Chinese national who's, of course, fluent in Mandarin. So we are seeing some amount of that as well. We do keep track of the languages that our coaches speak, and so when a client does ask for a specific language, it's usually not difficult for us to provide them with some options.
Brian,
maybe
okay.
one more, Ben.
One more
good
question.
question.
Okay.
Like those two were.
Okay, so is phone or Skype coaching taking hold in the corporate market?
Phone or Skype coaching. I have some research. The research we did that I referred to that should be available in the next week or so is going to specifically cover that. Excuse me. Yes, it most definitely is taking hold. People still perceive that face-to-face is more effective. Yeah, but I have seen research to suggest that face-to-face and virtual coaching is equally effective. In many of our program designs, we like to have some form of mixture, but we do like to have some amount of face-to-face whenever we can. But we do have one program, for example, with Microsoft that they've published this, so I'm not telling you any secrets, where they specifically are going to do all telephone video cam based coaching simply because it's just not feasible for the hundreds of leaders that they have getting coaching to fly coaches all over the place. I personally will do a mixture myself. I very much enjoy using Skype cameras to coach. And I'm sure some of you, though, have experienced that you can get some interference on the line and sometimes difficulty hearing each other, which can be incredibly frustrating when you're trying to coach someone and you're really trying to listen to what they have to say when the sound wobbles out and that kind of thing. But certainly is something that I think is continuing to be on the rise. Great questions. We will pause again in a little bit for some more questions. And I'd like to now move us on to a part that everyone finds very interesting in this topic, which is now that you found some coaches, how are you going to screen those coaches? And Ben, this would be the part where we do the poll that we talked about. Okay, and actually, Ben will probably switch the screen into a poll, but we're gonna ask you, what do you think executives most want when they are hiring a coach? This is from the perspective of the executive who's hiring a coach, not the company, but the executive. And here's a couple of choices: whether you could build rapport, what do you cost, what kind of business experience do you have an advanced degree? And so Ben's going to move us into poll mode.
It's in poll mode, Brian.
That, and then he can tell us how we found it.
Yeah, we're up to 50% have voted so far. Thank you, coaches. Just moving up to 60% now. And I think the results are slightly different this time, which is interesting. We're just now up to 70%. We're going to give it maybe another 25 seconds, 20 seconds or so, for the remaining coaches to vote. Okay, maybe 10 more seconds, and I am then going to close off the vote. Okay, thank you very much. Over 80% voted. Thank you so much. I'm closing the vote. 85%. Thank you. Okay, now I'm not sure you can see the results, Brian. I think everyone else can.
Yeah, I'm not able to, so yeah.
Okay, so 48% said ability to build rapport. 1% said the cost of the coach.
We have some smart people here.
51% said business experience, and 0% advanced degree. So very interesting.
That's funny. That's really interesting. We have some smart people here, Ben. The way they voted is pretty similar to what we're about to find out. So sharp people, I wasn't able to see if I could throw them off a little bit. Let me start with a few of the top items from our survey. Again, the survey we just completed. I'm purposely hiding the next items. Just the top 4 are being shown here. We used a 5-point scale. Excuse me, we asked executives to choose anything, basically, that they preferred. We asked them to click agree or strongly agree if they preferred each of these different items. And ability to build rapport, which many of you picked, came in first place, as you could imagine. It came in first place last time we ran this survey. Ability to build rapport, trust, and comfort with a coach. Next up was experience and skills as a coach. So just basically, how much experience do you have as a coach? How skilled are you as a coach is next highest. And then experience dealing with specific leadership challenges. That might be an example of that might be the executive is dealing with trying to brand themselves around the company. And so then that coach I referred to earlier, who's a specialist in branding, might be the coach that would be appealing for that type of executive. And following that, business experience. Many of you selected that, and that's 4th highest. In our survey last time around, we didn't have items 2 and 3 even in our list. We didn't ask them. So items 1 and 4 were the top 2 items then. And if we didn't have items 2 and 3, they would have been the top 2 yet again. And just to illuminate a little more, business experience is something we find that ideally companies constantly ask, we would like a coach who used to be a CEO before. We'd like a coach who used to run the Asia division of a company, or a coach who used to head up sales. And that's always wonderful type of request to get. And there are some coaches with that type of background. If we can find coaches with real C-level profit and loss experience background, we are thrilled. But business experience might also mean that you were internal staff roles at various companies. You might have been in charge of leadership development or organization development, or you were in human resources. That might be another place where coaches come from. Other coaches may have come more from a consulting type background. But what I think executives are saying here is they want someone who understands business and understands organizations, as opposed to someone that was working in a completely unrelated field and is now doing executive coaching. On the item about building rapport, very important. We all as coaches understand why. But you'll be surprised when I screen coaches how sometimes I find that certain coaches have challenges building rapport, even with me. And I'm actually I believe I'm a pretty easygoing guy to talk to. So if they have challenges building rapport with me, I then worry, how might they build rapport with an executive? Let's look at the rest of our choices. You can see match with the culture of our company is next. Being recommended by a colleague. Area of specialty as a coach. Location, where the the coach is located. I find this interesting. It's not at the bottom of the list, but it's not at the top. But when companies call me, this is actually one of the first things they ask for. We need a coach in Singapore. We need a coach in Paris. And then they tell me more about the request. But maybe it's not as important as they make it out to be. You can now see cost is next up. Experience in our industry is a lot lower than you would expect. Many companies also start by saying, we need a coach who has worked in the pharmaceutical industry or has worked in oil and gas. But executives don't really see that to be quite as important. Advanced degree is way down here for those of us who spent the time and money to get an advanced degree. Boo-hoo, it's only a 3 on that 5-point scale, and right behind it is coaching certification. So many of us have either done the route of an advanced degree or have gotten certified as a coach, or even both. Those are way down here. Executives, in fact, many of them don't even know what a certification was when we ask them. And finally is if you are certified in a specific tool or you use a specific instrument, that was sort of least interesting to the executives. And this graph, I hope you enjoy it. It's one that I like to study for long periods of time because this is what the end client is asking for, what the actual executive is asking for. But we do find some differences when we compare what executives had to say with organizations, and also when we compare it with what we as coaches have to say. In fact, we even looked at what external coaches have to say as well as internal coaches. And some of you listening today may be internal coaches. Let me point out a little bit here. This graph, a little hard to read perhaps, but we sort of rank ordered what came in first, second, third, fourth, etc. from organizations, from leaders, that's the one we just looked at, internal coaches, and external coaches. And you will see actually these top 5, if you just kind of flip them around here and there, they're actually pretty much the same. Rapport, experience, and skill as a coach came in 1 and 2 from all groups. Business experience shows up from 3 of the 4 groups. And you can see dealing with specific challenges is here. Organizations are really interested in coaches that match up with their culture. And you can see that fell in 3rd from organizations, but 5th and 5th from executives and internals. Generally, pretty consistent among all of these groups. And the organizations do seem to value more your experience and the match with the culture than others. And I find that when I hand coaches over to an organization, the HR people, leadership development people, they'll screen the coach first, and they're usually looking for how might this coach fit in our company. And once they figure that out, then they might pass the coach's bio on to the executive who needs coaching. Look at some of these differences for the least important criteria. We just saw some of these as it related to leaders. Sorry, this is the 3rd from last, 2nd from last, and last. That's the order they went in. You'll see generally specific instrument or tool fell in last for all of them. Coaching certification fell in last for 3 out of 4. Guess which group did not put certification in the last couple of items? That would be internal coaches. And I'll talk about that just in a moment. Industry experience, advanced degree also came low as well. Internals, we found through our research, internal coaches tended to have more certification, specific coaching certification, than externals did. Internals tended to value certification as important more than other groups did. We also noticed that internals tended to have fewer years experience as a coach. And one observation I have since made is that many externals, especially if they've been coaching 10 years or more, often won't have a certification, very often because there just weren't certifications. Despite my age, I've actually been in this field for 15, 16 years. There was no such thing as a coaching certification, or at least nothing that I'd ever heard of. when I started doing this work, and we sort of figured this out as we went along. Nowadays, there's lots of certification options that one could take, and coaches are certainly availing themselves of that. And you will find internals will tend to be more likely to pursue a certification. Some of the ways that companies do screen you, and some of these we do here at CoachSource, I'll tell you a little bit about. There's often an application. We have one on our website. Those of you who screen coaches for large organizations, you're welcome to go grab it from our website and copy it if you want. We won't be offended. We'll be honored. I then, after I get an application, I will usually do a telephone call, or most often nowadays a video Skype call. We ask coaches, most coaches by now are technically savvy enough that they've got the camera and they know how to use it. And so my office will usually set up a video call between me and the coach. Whenever I can meet the person in person for a live interview, of course I always do that. And many of our clients obviously do the same thing. I've heard of a few clients that actually do a fishbowl. It doesn't happen often, but where they actually have you coaching in front of others at the company site. In our book, we talk about how Unilever used to actually do these fish bowls. They describe the process they used. In fact, I just was there to see them about 3 weeks ago. I got to see the location where they were doing those. They're not currently doing them, but it sounded very robust. You were there for a full day as a coach. And if I remember, only about half the coaches that went through this screening actually stayed on to be part of their cadre after they were actually seen coaching. Of course, after all of this has happened, then the executive themselves who might want to hire you is then someone who's going to screen as well. And we have a few coaches now and then that seem to make it to this stage and never make it past this stage, which always gets us to raise our eyebrows at CoachSource as to what is happening and why is that. Many companies will allow coaches, if they start working, to have some process by which, if the assignment isn't going so well, to replace the coach at some point. And what we do is we run a satisfaction survey in our coaching assignment so we can find out if we have a mismatch and we can do something about it. One of our clients has created this concept called a coach divorce. I'm not wild about the term, but they basically have coaches agree that if after a session or two, if the executive is not wild about the match, that they can switch coaches without cost to them. And another screening method, as I mentioned at the outset, is perhaps a quick check on someone's website, see if they have a video. And I have been increasingly impressed when I see a coach's good quality website and nice video that I could watch to get a flavor for them. And sometimes it's worked against someone if their website doesn't look so great or is not very professional looking. I talked to a coach recently who clearly had a late 1990s website with flashing GIF images and some of her favorite links of other companies she likes, kind of one of those style websites. And she was a really impressive coach, and I did just flat out tell her, I think you really need a new website. Some of our clients here in Silicon Valley include Google and Yahoo and companies like that, and you can bet they're going to Google you and they are going to look at your website. And again, you don't have to be a perfectly brand new website, but it has to at least portray a professional image. The next set of tips I offer, so you don't have, this is my suggestion, don't do any of these things that I'm about to offer. And these are things when I talk to groups of organizations, people who screen coaches, I tell them, these are some of the things that I look out for when I'm screening, and they sort of laugh as I show them my list. But here's some of the things that I hear when I meet with coaches. I can't tell you how many times I've met a coach who says to me, I only work at the C-level with a leader, the CEO, or someone the CEO appoints. And I once jokingly tried to do some math on that. If you figure out there's 500 Fortune 500 CEOs, And the number of coaches who have then told me that they only work with the CEO, considering that about 60% of Fortune 500s use coaching, to the best I know, and fewer than that actually have a coach working with the CEO, then there's no way that that math can actually work. I find that sometimes I'll call that coach who only works with the CEO and I say, look, I have a middle manager assignment and it only pays this. It's all we have at the moment. Are you interested? And they often still say yes. So I find that that does not necessarily mean that they only work with the CEO. Sometimes I talk to coaches about as an assignment and then they suddenly say, well, I can't do it, but I have an affiliate you should talk to or a coach in our network. And the reason why that gets me a little nervous is usually I have to screen the affiliate too, and now you've just doubled my work in the assignment I'm trying to solve here. And so usually I like to have those people screened ahead of time. Coaches who have lots and lots of certifications and initials after their name. Now that's not a bad thing in and of itself. But I do get coaches who apply to us and I don't even know what the initials mean, and I'm in this field. Why is that a problem? In and of itself, it's not, but sometimes we find people who, with lots of certifications and so on, they might not have a lot of business experience. They may not even have an advanced degree, which many of our clients do require as a minimum. And the business experience in particular is something that we really need to see a lot of. And so, I think that's more important, something to highlight in your bio than it is all the certifications. I advise my clients that someone who's just left a company, who was in charge of, leadership development or something, if they're going to set up shop as a coach, that's actually wonderful. But sometimes I warn them, just be careful, they might actually still be looking for another full-time job, and they could leave you in the lurch if you hire them as a coach midway through. I tell my clients, there are coaches out there who do not network very well and who haven't written much of anything, and they just go out there and do the work, and these people are fabulous coaches. I call them hidden gems, and I have a number of in our network who are pretty poorly networked, in all honesty. You haven't heard of them, but every time we put them on assignment, they've been incredible and have done really great work. And I tell my clients, don't miss out on these kinds of people. I also talk about, to you, I mentioned, if someone can't build rapport, I ought to be concerned about using them as a coach. I remember we had one coach apply to us, and he was really mishandling my poor administrative assistant. They were trying to set up a meeting between us when I came to his town, and she really was getting frustrated with the way he was treating her. And she forwarded me the various emails and so on, and I didn't like the tone he was using. And granted, he was very nice to me. I'm sure he'd be very nice to an executive. But still, that makes me very worried, because the last thing you need is, what if he's like that with the executive's administrative assistant? Or if he's even like that with an executive. That's a big no-no in our book. And we also watch out for coaches who really haven't coached much. Sometimes they'll come and say, kind of over-exaggerate what they do as a coach. We jokingly call them wannabe coaches. WNB coaches is not a scientific term, but we like to find out, how long have you actually been coaching and running your own business as an executive coach? A lot of our clients now are asking for 5 years minimum experience, maybe 10. More senior coaches are getting towards 10, 15 years experience, and so we're starting to see that that's more what they're looking for. So those are some of the things that we find when we're sourcing and screening coaches. And Ben, this is another great pause point for additional questions. We could take a few more, and then I'll do one more slide having to do with trends that we see in the industry, and then we can continue on with additional questions. We're about 57 minutes into the presentation. So let's see, Ben, if you are able to unmute and come back to us here. If you can tell me what kind of questions you're now seeing.
As certifications have become more prevalent, do you expect certifications to become more often required or desired?
I get asked that question almost more than anything else, I think. And I still don't know how to predict that. One of my future trends that you'll see on our next slide has to do with increasing noise around this whole issue of certification. Certain countries, it's more important than others. But you can see from the list of criteria we went through that certification was down near the bottom of what executives wanted in a coach and what organizations wanted in coaches that they hired. Now, I've been doing this for a number of years, and it's still only in one hand that I could count the times where I was specifically asked for a coach who was certified. I had one client ask for that, and we were able to provide it because we do keep track of that. We've had one or two requests where they wanted an MCC coach, and I've heard, bits and pieces of companies, or people telling me, I've heard that the U.S. government requires certified coaches. I don't know if that's 100% true all throughout the government, but I have heard that at least a certain portion of the government does ask for that. So it's still hard for me to tell whether or not that would become an industry standard. You could look at a lot of really well-known coaches who do not have a certification. Marshall Goldsmith is one of them, for example. A lot of the real seasoned senior coaches that I would turn to first here at CoachSource don't have certifications. I don't have one either. So to apply that as the sole criteria for what makes a good coach or not, I think would be a bit of a dangerous move for the industry to take.
Okay. So someone's posted that they got a gig with NASA and they required an ICF certification. So how about that?
Yes, I've heard that about NASA, yes, and that's part of the U.S. government element that I just mentioned, and NASA is one that I definitely had heard about for sure. I do wonder, and I'll say this too, is as you saw in our research, increasing numbers of internal coaches at companies are certified, and increasingly one of those types of folks would be the one in charge of coaching for their company. Excuse me. And when that's the case, then it could be more likely, since that person is certified themselves, that they would then start to ask for coaches who are certified, because that's kind of the background that they've come from. I haven't seen that actually happen yet, except in one case, but one of my guesses is that that could happen more often.
Okay.
What else, Ben?
How do clients determine whether a coach has experience or skill?
So as it relates to experience, some of these elements that I just talked about are some of the things that we all do. So the application, for example, I'm trying to look at what kind of business experience does someone have? Where did they come from in business? What were they in charge of? What did they do? And then, how did they get into coaching? And where did they learn coaching? And how much coaching have they done? At what companies have they done coaching? Those are some of the things we have to look at. What's interesting about our field, it's one of the few fields, really, where you don't really have someone else hanging around to watch you do your work to see if you're any good at it. In most any other field, let's say you're trying to be a surgeon, and you would hang out in the room while other surgeons do the surgery, and at some point you're now doing the surgery and they're videotaping it, and the other surgeons are there watching you. You might even be doing it in a big theater or something like that. Or if you're a pilot, it's the same thing. They come and watch you fly the plane. And in coaching, because of the way we work confidentiality, we don't really have a mechanism where I could actually sit in and watch one of my coaches do their work to see if they're any good. And so we have to rely on other means, such as screening them ahead of time, recommendation from others, and then measuring results after the fact, or a number of different things that we do to see that the coach actually has had an impact. So it's a very interesting field from that perspective. I'm still mulling over, is there some way we could change that and make a field where we actually could learn and grow just like they would in, some of these other professions I've noted. that's a very good question, though, nonetheless.
Thank you very much for that, Brian. What do you
Yeah.
see happening related to coach supervision? Are clients doing that or requiring it more? Sorry, are clients doing that or requiring it more these days?
So I'm really interested in the serendipitous nature of this question. The reason is, so I was just in the UK about 2 weeks ago, where this question was brought up multiple times. I was on a call with a client about 3 weeks ago where someone from the UK was on the call and asked us about supervision as well. And I'm hearing so much about it that I am now investigating it in more thorough manner. As you can tell from my response, here in the US, this is not really something that we do or are particularly familiar with. At least I've seen or heard very little about it. But in the UK, it's particularly of interest. And when I was in the UK, I asked every coach there about their view on supervision. Every coach I met had a supervisor and spoke very highly of the practice and told me about how it worked and how it's paid for and all of that. And while we've not had it required of us by any client yet, I'm hearing so much about it that I am, again, pledging myself to really get to know more about this concept and figure out how and if we may respond as CoachSource. I think it's a wonderful process or method that ought to be employed, but as you can tell from my response, we're relatively unfamiliar with its use in the States, at least the avenues that I seem to be hanging out in. But thank you to whoever asked that question. I still would like to learn more about it and see how we might apply it at a company like mine. I think the fact that I keep being asked about supervision this many times in about a 1 month period means that, one of those things that hits you on the head, like, okay, it's time to really get to take this seriously.
Okay, Brian, one more question.
So,
before we move on,
yeah.
if that's okay. Okay.
Yeah.
From a new coach perspective, what would be your recommendations to go from zero to hero?
Well, it's hard to answer that without knowing more about the background of the coach who's asking. So, and then what exactly do you mean by hero? Of course, what's the definition of that? But the best I can say is, if this individual has a good amount of business experience, that ought to be really highlighted in their marketing materials and so forth. But in the end, it's about making real change in the leader that you're coaching. And I think that's where the hero part comes in. If you're really able to help facilitate that change in the individual to the point where others notice it and see marked change, that's where the hero part comes in. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with Marshall Goldsmith's work, he has done a ton of research on leadership coaching and the impact of following up with key stakeholders around the leader who's being coached. And he measures the impact of coaching at the end of assignments. We do too. We have that measurement from him. But what I always advise coaches is to implement some kind of metric like the one that he's using in your work. And then you can measure whether or not someone improved, and then you can find out whether you really were a hero. It'll be on paper. And making a big measurable change in an executive's career, life, leadership style can impact hundreds, if not thousands of people in an organization. And that right there is the hero part of it, if you can really help make that change happen. Best I can do without having a whole lot of facts to answer that question, Ben, but I hope that was helpful. few trends I want to end us with, and then we can stay on for some more questions. And if you don't have time to get your question answered, again, you can put it on the Facebook page. I'll keep an eye on that, or you can tweet it over here, and we can talk that method if we have to. A few trends that we're seeing, definitely growth in this industry is quite impressive. I'm quite sure Ben would tell you that registrations for this particular conference have grown each of the 3 years that he's done it. I'm pretty sure ICF membership has grown each of the last 3 years. My company has doubled in size in the last 2 years in terms of revenues. Growth internationally is incredible as well. So we're really seeing continued growth here in the coaching marketplace. I don't know what our total industry revenues are. I've heard 1 billion, I've heard 2 billion, but I don't know that it's ever been officially studied. But it's definitely an industry that I see is continuing to grow, and those that I know in the field are echoing what I'm mentioning. Something else we're seeing is this trend towards more of a managed approach toward coaching in major corporations. Just like the example I gave you about Dell, we continue to see other companies that are doing something similar, or they may have one or two, or at least a few main coaching vendors that kind of run all of their coaching activity. But a newer trend over the last year or so that I'm very fascinated with is this next half here is coach management software. We are getting more clients asking us for help in managing coaching activity via software or online cloud services. So basically, someone is in charge of coaching at a company, and they spend all this time keeping track of all their coaches and who's doing what and where are they and what's going on with the internal coaches. And they've got to do all of this management, and it takes up so much of their time that they're very interested in any kind of online tool that can help manage coaching activity. And so we've been getting a lot of inquiries for this. We actually had already developed our own system that we've used for a few years around CoachSource. And then we recently ran into a newer online system that we are so impressed with that we're in we have a pledge to buy that company now at this moment that really can make life easier for those who have to manage coaching at an enterprise. Definitely something we're seeing, and I'm sure those of you as coaches will probably be interacting with these systems more often at some of the companies that you serve. The use of internal coaches is continuing to grow. This makes sense. Coaching is quite popular, and internal coaching is a way to spread coaching out more throughout an enterprise without the relatively much more expensive version of using external coaches. And so we are seeing more companies building a cadre of internal coaches and getting them trained, getting them certified, so they can do coaching within the organization. And this issue of certification continues to be a trend as well. I don't know what the trend means as it relates to where will it go, but it's still most definitely an issue that people are talking about everywhere I travel in the world. So those are some of the trends that we see out there. This thing about supervision, is also on my mind as I continue to discuss it with folks as well. But it's an industry that definitely is continuing to grow and expand, and we're really thrilled about that. We see some incredible potential in this industry. We also see big companies getting into the coaching field, like big executive search or outplacement firms over the last few years have gotten into coaching and have begun coaching practices as well. So we definitely see an industry that's definitely in growth mode, and we're sort of thrilled to be associated with it for sure. So we continue this dialogue, Ben, with more questions. I'd like to encourage you to become my friend if you'd like on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with you. I'd like to connect with you on Twitter if that's your preference, or both. I'll also keep an eye on the Facebook page as well. I did mention that our research, I wish I had it for you today. It'll be available in probably a week or so, and I'll be sure to tweet and whatnot at that point once it is. Those of you who actually filled out our survey back when we offered it will be getting the results automatically sent to you. And as always, it's an absolute delight to be part of this conference. Ben has just done an incredible job building this up to really be an industry standard conference. I'm absolutely honored to have been invited back for 3 years in a row, and very thrilled to just continue to watch the growth of this industry and in touch with you all. Ben, we can go ahead and start taking more questions, I think, to until whatever time you feel appropriate.
No worries. Okay.
I have to go. Thank you for attending, and I'll hang out for more questions.
Okay, so we have, is there somewhere where we can learn more about measuring the impact on executives' performance and lives? So we're talking ROI.
Yeah. I have 2 answers to that. One is in the book you see here. We have 1 chapter on that. But in addition to that, Marshall Goldsmith has done a ton of work in this area, and he gives away most of what he's written is available for free on his website. And his website's marshallgoldsmith.com. He has a number of articles there about measuring impact. He's really been a master.
Sorry to cut in, Brian. If you go to marshallgoldsmithlibrary.com, you'll find...
Yes, marshallgoldsmithlibrary.com. Yes, that's the place. There's a lot there. I've written a couple of chapters in various books as well that we're basically saying the same thing because we're using his methodology. So I strongly encourage you to go take a look at that. Use that methodology in your own work. There's no charge. It's free. Just do it because we'd love to see more metrics in our industry being used. I will say the ROI part of it, return on investment, that's the trickier one to measure. That's the one that's a little, I don't know, a little hard to get your arms around because the methodologies that are out there are still a bit subjective. But I will give a name if you feel like looking into this. A friend of ours is really kind of one of the leaders in this area of measuring ROI, and she's got webinars and everything about how to do it. In fact, Ben, you might have her on a future conference. Her name is Lisa Edwards. And she works with Jack Phillips, who I believe his company is called the ROI Institute. He's really famous for his work in measuring the ROI of training and so forth. So she took a lot of that work and applied it to measuring coaching. And we've had her as a keynote speaker at CoachSource. And right now, if that's your interest, that's the best methodology I've seen for how to measure the ROI of coaching. And Lisa Edwards, I'm sure you can look her up. I don't have her website handy at the moment, but you could look her up to learn more about her work in this area.
Super, thank you very much for that. Okay. Yes, are you able to give it? Do you have a company? Is it the ROI Institute? Did you say? It's just there's a lot of people saying that they're googling it right now.
Okay, then that sounds very, very correct.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so Brian, what do you see, and what do you think is the real need that is driving the growth in coaching demand?
Yeah. So what's driving the growth of coaching? By the way, I've now, if my screen is still showing, I found Lisa's book that she's written on this very topic with Jack Phillips. It's called Measuring the Success of Coaching. It's very in-depth. I remember when she sent me an advanced copy and talks all about how she does it. But as I mentioned, she also does webinars. I don't remember if they're free or not, but they might be about how it's done.
Brian, I'll ask you if you'll give me a...
Ben, the next question.
So I was going to say, Brian, I have to ask you for a referral to Lisa, and we'll get her on next year's WBEC, so she sounds like someone that we might all like to listen to, I believe.
Yes, definitely. She's a good speaker, too. I really enjoy. I've actually co-presented with her in the past. She's a really good speaker.
Super. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm starting with not as much business experience as I'd like to. but I've been trained as an executive coach. How can I gain more experience if the first thing clients are asking for is experience?
Yes. Yes, I get asked that a lot. It's a tricky one, just like in any industry. They want you to have experience, but then how are you supposed to get experience? And so a few things I would suggest. One is, if you can get experience somehow, some way, please do so. And that might mean perhaps you offer your services to a worthy nonprofit at a good discount, or even complimentary, so that you're getting some experience working with a senior executive. Maybe you have someone that you know, a family or friend or something that is an executive somewhere that would be willing to be coached by you as well. But on top of that, there's nothing to stop you from being the world's leading expert in something relating to leadership, for example. And who knows what that might be for you? You might, have a specialty in some aspect from your previous career that you could really turn into an expertise where you've written, articles or even a book, and done a lot of research in a particular topic area. So even if you might not have a ton of coaching experience in general, no one would dispute that you know more about a given topic than most anyone else,
I would
and
definitely
that you
second
would
that.
really be an expert.
I would definitely
Yeah,
second
yeah,
that, Brian.
absolutely.
I mean, when I first started out in business, I got a similar advice, and I just looked for an area that was growing in other industries similar to coaching, which was social
Mm-hmm.
media, and it was just going
Mm-hmm.
like crazy. And so I decided to become the world's leading expert in social media. So I read every book, I did every course, I studied it. I wrote blog after blog after blog. I created a group which had like 3 or 4 thousand coaches in there. We tested things,
Mm-hmm.
and before long, I could confidently say I was the world's leading specialist in social media for business and executive coaches. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that was my area of expertise, and I could have carried on doing that, of course, but I went branched off to doing lots of other things. But as a coach, there's so many different areas that you can specialize, so many niches, so many industries, so many
Mm-hmm.
roles, and you can combine things together as well. That will give you that, and it's to become the world's leading expert in anything immediately gets you speaking engagements. When you get speaking
Mm-hmm.
engagements, that results in inquiries, and the inquiries obviously often turn into engagement. And some of the biggest engagements you'll get will come from things like speaking, and you won't get the speaking unless you have some reason to be on the stage. And as Brian says,
Mm-hmm.
that's how you can get there, is just by simply finding an area that you can become known as the go-to person for that particular skill set or industry or knowledge base.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You couldn't have said it better. And there's coaches I've met who, maybe their last career was in real estate, for example, and they decided to become a real specialist in leadership and coaching in the real estate industry, for example. And, there's that's where they focus. That's their niche. And no one's going to dispute that. And they're using their past experience in life for to apply to their current new career. So I think what Ben has said is exactly really the best way you can go about that.
Okay, maybe one or two more questions. One of the questions
Sure.
we asked, I think it got passed through when we were talking about something else. But going back to the need, um, what do you see as the real need that is driving the growth of coaching? What is it
Yes.
actually that coaches need? Clients are needing that's sort of
Yeah,
behind
that's
the
right.
growth.
Yeah, you asked that question earlier and I got distracted, so thank you for getting me back on track. Um, so my experience is, when I first started in this field, companies were still doing, oh, let's send all our executives away to a 5-day or even a 2-week leadership offsite training development experience. And today, the thought of sending your executive team off for something like that would generate a lot of laughs. I mean, who would actually take that kind of time to get off site for that long of development? And I think, the pace of change, the demands on our time, and so on, require executives to kind of be in their job and learn as they're going along. And coaching allows that. So the executive doesn't have to leave their post to gain development. And it's more sticky. Coaching is more sticky. We would all agree with that. If you just went to a training to learn something, the amount of retention you would have compared to if you learned something and then you had coaching to back it up is obviously greatly enhanced through the coaching experience. So the amount of stickiness that coaching offers is much higher. So I think those two factors right there are big drivers of what we're seeing. Interestingly, we had an economic slowdown in 2008 in particular here in the U.S. and other parts of the world. We did see a bit of a slowdown in our business, but not a major slowdown. We were still getting a lot of coaching requests. And what we surmised with that is you still have a global marketplace. You still have lots of complexity. You still have companies fighting for really good talent and trying to develop that talent, even in a thinner, a slower economy. And they were still interested in hiring coaches. I don't think they were going to send executives away to a 5-day training anymore, but they had certain key executives they really needed to continue to grow and develop, and they wanted to retain them. And so they'd still be interested in using coaching, even though the economy was slow. So those are some of my speculations on that. And at least for the moment that we're continuing to see some of those trends, it's hard for me to believe that some of these high-tech companies I work at, that you could convince them to send their top executives away for a 2-week development experience. It's just really hard to see them actually able to take that kind of time.
Well,
I think that's why coaching has gained in popularity.
One of the things that we're looking to do is with our event is to kind of bring together the best of the best in the entire world, the thought leaders, the game changers, not the kind of hypey, those that make a big noise and are good at marketing, but the people that really are having a profound impact on coaches around the world. That's how we start WBEX every year. I send out an email to my vast network saying, hey guys, one question. Who has had a profound impact on your success over the last year as a coach? Who's developed your skills so you've gone to clients and they've just been wowed by what you've learned and you passed on to them? And each year by bringing together, I mean, this year it's like 13,000 coaches coming together learning with us, right? And we feel that we are driving the industry forward in our little way. And seeing that a number of the larger coaching organizations like the ICF, the Association of Coaching, the EMCC, all coming together to look at common standards and common accreditations and things like that, the industry is only going to get better. The quality of provision is going to improve. And as we've seen right at the start, where do coaching clients come from? From referrals. Now, if somebody has a bad experience with a coach because they just aren't up to scratch or they're not providing as good a service as they might do, that referral is not going to come. Whereas if coaches across the board are offering a higher quality service, they're getting better results for their clients, the ROI improves across the board. What actually happens is collective pie growing. So the whole pie as a whole actually grows because right now we're in a really strange industry. Why we're in such a strange industry is because there's actually more clients than there are coaches. The demand actually completely outstrips the supply. The only reason that coaches have a challenge and you have coaches that aren't doing so well and coaches going out of business and stuff is simply that they're, number one, obviously are not able to market themselves, but also then they're not educating the market, and the market is able to connect with them in such a way. And also there are a few challenges that exist around coaching organizations setting up and training coaches in 48 hours, and all of a sudden you're a certified coach. And obviously in certain areas of the world, a place like Bangalore, for example, Shanghai, I've just spent a lot of time there. There's a bit of an epidemic of coaches being trained. Like I met one organization that were training something like 150 coaches a week. And
oh wow.
Yeah, and I was looking at I went through their program, and I'm like, wow. And they were going to corporates, and and they just probably weren't as up to scratch as they might have been. And that kind of does the opposite. That kind of damages our industry a little bit. And we want to stand here and unify the quality organizations. That's why we Coach Source, who Brian's company is, they only work with high quality coaches. They do vetting, and that's why we're happy to be aligned with them. All of the large associations, all the other organizations that we align ourselves, we won't align ourselves with anyone that is not high quality. So almost, you can go through the speakers, the organizations that are part of and align with WBEC, because we can partner with anyone, pretty much any coaching organization out there we can go to and say, hey, would you like to be part of the world's largest advanced business executive coaches? They're going to say, yeah. But we kind of handpick those that are reputable and do great things for the industry. So anyway, I'm going to close on that. That's probably the most you're going to hear from me for the whole of WBEX. But I even pulled myself out as a speaker this year because the quality of everyone else was so much better than me. But anyway, I would like to say a big thank you to Brian for today's session. It's been super. I just had a professor, I think it is from UCLA, write to me saying, "What a super session for you, Brian." So there you go.
Thank you.
And big but, please post this feedback onto the Facebook wall. It'd be great. And there's a lot of questions that didn't get answered today, and for that I apologize. However, Brian will have some time to. He's kindly offered some time to jump onto the Facebook wall throughout the next couple of days and answer your questions. So jump on there. You have one of the best resources in the world that has the answers to the questions you're probably wondering. Don't be sat there thinking, I wonder what about this, and is this actually important? And I've been told this by this organization. Get the real deal, the real facts from somebody who has vast experience, first-hand experience. So please take advantage of that and jump onto facebook.com/WBECS. Or you can tweet. Brian, what's your handle again? It's at
Underhill.
Bunderhill. So there you go. You can also liaise with and contact Brian directly that way. Okay. Thank you so much once again, Brian. And thank you everyone for joining us. It's midnight here in the United Kingdom. I will be in the UK for the next 2 weeks or so, and then I'm going on holiday after this 8 months of crazy launch, putting this event together. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and I will call this session to an end. So take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you.